And also the evaluation can happen, can occur during at midpoint in an intervention or a program, or at when the intervention is completed. This is a useful evaluation when we are seeking an independent judgment of a program or intervention. Conventional evaluation usually responds to an accountability purpose. However, in recent years, learning has become increasingly an objective and a purpose of conventional evaluation as well among MDBs.
So now I will do the same sequence of elements, but on the participatory evaluation. Who should we engage with? So not the stakeholders and the clients of the evaluation are our main focus. In IDEV's case, for example, we consult with board members, AfDB staff, counterparts in regional member countries, project staff, civil society, beneficiaries, and others, as long as we understand that they are relevant to the intervention being evaluated. In case of what? In consultation with the stakeholders, we define the scope of the evaluation. And this means that we will try to understand what the stakeholders themselves expect to find and learn from it. This not only will increase ownership, but also the potential of use of the evaluation. When? In this case, consultations are several and they happen throughout the milestones of the evaluation. And why? Accountability obviously is always an objective, but the main focus here is on learning, given that we aim to empower stakeholders and beneficiaries. The evaluation serves as basis to work for improvement, increase learning, build capacity, and inform decisions. Next, we will look at what we understand as key steps of participatory evaluation. We have defined 5, starting with engaging the stakeholders, that we see it as going beyond using these individuals as source of information. We also engage them as owners and practitioners of the evaluation. In order to establish this commitment, we need to be clear on what we will decide that will be their role and at which stage will they intervene. Normally, we would engage them in the design of the evaluation. This means that either designing the logical framework or the theory of change, stakeholders will be part of these decisions of what are considered the inputs, the outputs, the outcomes, and what are we looking for as impact. This will also affect the questions and the data collection methods that we decide to apply. The fourth step would be the data collection per se and the analysis, where we can also engage these actors. And finally, and definitely here, we will engage with our stakeholders on reaching conclusions, providing recommendations, and defining an action plan. These have to be discussed, and we have to give them an opportunity also to react to our conclusions. And if we expect an increased ownership and an increased use of the evaluation, we will definitely involve them at this stage.
Thank you. So here we would like to share with you 2 methods that can be used when collecting information in a participatory evaluation. Of course, it's also possible to use other tools such as focus group discussions or interviews during a participatory process. But these 2 are actually very interesting to use in the context of a participatory evaluation. So the most significant change, we're just going to share an overview of what it entails. It is an M&E technique, which consists of collecting change stories within a community, for example, regarding a specific project or an intervention. So what happens then after selecting different stories is that the community together, or the participants in the evaluation together, will determine which are the most important of these stories that are useful in assessing the performance. Usually it's a simple question, and also the group decides what is the change that is going to be measured, and they are involved in the analysis of the data collected. And since this is a tool that is also used in monitoring, so it's very interesting for evaluation, because then it allows like the collection of information throughout the life cycle of the project, which will become then useful for the evaluation at the end. Another interesting tool is participatory video. So the method is useful as it brings together a community to explore and also engage in a dialogue on issues that are of interest to all. It can also be an empowering process for the community, enabling also a better understanding and also fostering engagement and motivation. So this process is very interactive, but it is facilitated also by practitioner. So communities then through this have a creative way of like sharing or communicating their stories to a larger audience. So it consists of recording videos of themselves, the world around them, to capture changes and so on. We wanted to share with you a video that will really better illustrate this, but unfortunately for technical issues, we could really manage to play the video through the presentation. But the link is inserted in the presentation, and because we will share the presentation with everyone at the end of the session, so you can watch the video later on. Now, participatory evaluation is believed to have many advantages. It is a proactive, inclusive, and also it's a technique that promotes dialogue and builds trust. Okay, so many advantages are recognized, such as creating ownership of the evaluation process, the results, and action, involving different people or different groups of people in the evaluation contributes also to increasing the credibility and the relevance of the process and finding. Diversification is important at different stages of the evaluation, when defining the questions, analyzing the information collected, coming up with the recommendations, and also the actions that are to be undertaken. So it's really an interesting tool in that sense. Participatory evaluation also contributes to creating capacity among local participants and clients and so on. So yeah, capacity building is also an interesting advantage that we get from participatory evaluation. Learning is also promoted through this method. It's also an opportunity for decision makers to have a better understanding of the intervention through the perspective of those that are the most affected by the intervention, the beneficiaries or the program staff, for example, have insights and perspectives that are unique and that are all useful and important for future operations or for ongoing operations if the participatory evaluations is, for example, a midterm evaluation. Transparency is also increased as well as accountability. So participatory evaluation is really a dynamic evaluation. It provides comprehensive and a set of findings that is representative as it meets the needs of various stakeholders.
I was thinking, Latefa, while you were explaining the development of local capacity, and for instance, when we work with the regional member countries, governments, and in our evaluations, it's interesting to try and engage a member from the government, for instance, at the level of monitoring and evaluation units, and maybe when we did country strategy program evaluations, they can participate from the beginning to the end in this process, and this will help them as well to boost their capacity at the national level. Of course, that with all advantages, there are also challenges. We would like to call your attention to a few of them. The evaluation might be seen as less objective. It is up to the evaluator to have enough backup technical evidence-based information to be able to defend its findings and conclusions in an objective way. It is very important to make sure that the stakeholders selection is indeed inclusive, ensuring representation of all voices and actors in a community, for example, and not only the leaders. That are usually the ones that stand out. This includes obviously concerns at the level of gender, age, race, and others. There are also notably challenges at the level of technical aspects. Engaging with as many stakeholders as we can and being fit doesn't mean that we don't gather the necessary expertise, meaning either language expertise or sector expertise that we need to take forward our evaluation in a correct way. And obviously that adding to this, all these conditions might aggravate our expectations of time and resources. This approach can reveal to be more demanding than others in terms of time and resources. For example, availability of stakeholders to participate throughout the process of evaluation needs to be negotiated at the beginning and in advance, and in order to ensure that they will be committed throughout the whole evaluation. This cannot be expected as a given, and we also have to create incentives and in order to make sure this can happen in a constructive way. With this also comes with the need of establishing a relationship. Building a relationship and establishing trust is paramount, not only to ensure the commitment, as I said before, but also to allow stakeholders to feel in a safe space, especially if the subject in question are sensitive. They need to feel safe to intervene in a free, honest way. This obviously, if we want to as much honesty and credibility as we can. Last, but not less important, we need to understand the context in advance. We cannot just arrive without doing our homework. We have to make sure that before engaging with the community, we understand the background. This includes culture and language, as we mentioned before, but probably also the history of the community and of the intervention, religious, ethnic, political issues, all kinds of issues you can identify when you're studying a certain community. We need to understand where our stakeholders are coming from, also to judge their interventions, and make sure that we respect the principle of doing no harm.
So this leads me to ethical considerations, and this is actually important to consider in all kinds of evaluation that we do. So we have recorded or retained these 6 principles that we are going to share with you today. So the first one is respect for vulnerable people. We have to ensure that in our evaluation, we protect and we ensure the timeliness as well as of our process, and as well as ensure that they are respectful and respond to the realities of our stakeholders. Important also in this regard is to be aware of the power dynamics that may exist in a community or in a given setting. It's important to make sure that we are taking diverse view into consideration, and to ensure that our findings are as accurate as possible. Regarding this, to share an example with you, about 2 years ago, when we were doing a field mission in Guinea-Bissau, during one of our focus group that was a mixed one, so there were men and also women. We realized at a point in the conversation that each time that during the conversation first, it was only men that were expressing themselves, that were responding to our questions. So we had to make effort to engage the women as well. But even when we did so, we could perceive that they were a bit reluctant to share their views. Sometimes they would look at the men before speaking, and we could sense that we were not really getting everything that we could have gotten. So it's very important to be aware of these things, and we realized that it would have been probably useful if we had separated the two groups, another group for men and another group for women. Respect for free and informed consent. It's important to get consent from the stakeholders if we really want to engage them in the process. We have to make sure that they understand what is expected of them as part of the process, and what the evaluation is really about, and they need to be aware that they are participating really on a voluntary basis, and they should be free to drop out of the participation when they feel uncomfortable about this. However, the complicated part with this is that how do you make sure that all stakeholders have the same understanding of these consent forms? So this is where, like Carla have said before, it's important, for example, if we're in the context of a rural area, to make sure that there is no language barrier, and that the team has members who can speak the language of the people that we want to engage, so that the understanding is really there. Justice and inclusiveness, again, relates a little bit to the awareness about the power differentials. We need to ensure that the process does not discriminate at all. Maximizing benefits and minimizing harm is very important. And this, we have to make sure that we are taking stakeholders in a holistic way. We need to ensure that their social well-being, their physical and their psychological well-being is ensured throughout the evaluation process. This will only contribute to ensuring that they are fully involved, and also will ensure a space where their skills are built, and they really participate to the full potential. Privacy and to make sure that their information are kept confidential, because sometimes there might be sharing of sensitive information, and it's very, very important that we ensure that they know that their information is safe, and that this will not be shared with anyone else, and that also what they're sharing is not, it's not possible to really trace back the information to a specific person. Human dignity is also important to respect in evaluation. We need to demonstrate this, and by principally taking the views of the people around the table into consideration. And in this way, they will be really more open to sharing their knowledge with us.
Thank you, Latefa. So, how to ensure effective participation? It's also an important reflection in order to ensure the successful application of this method. So we would advise taking into consideration a number of things. Be clear on your decision of who your stakeholders are and who you're going to engage. Remember all the aspects we mentioned before, for example, the right mix of people, good representation of the community, etc. Always be clear on the objective and duration of the evaluation with your stakeholders. Remember, this is a collective process. Everybody needs to understand why we are doing this, for how long will this be, and what is it expected from me as a part of it. Then take into consideration the process to structure and channel participation is clear. The experience of evaluator and facilitation skills are also key. This is a method that depends very much on people's skills, on how you engage with others, your capacity of empathy, and your capacity of listening. It's very important to listen more than communicating, and understanding your environment and your surroundings, and as Latefa said before, power dynamics, etc. Try to engage the buy-in of the program or project manager intervention that you are evaluating. It's very important at the beginning, because stakeholders will feel safer to be part of your evaluation, but also at the end, because it ensures the correct use of its results. We also mentioned before adequate time and funding. Be realistic in your planning, and also try to ensure finding the right balance between good participatory process and statistical valid data or other scientific evidence-based information that you can provide in order to defend your evaluation against any suspicion of bias or less objectivity that you might be accused of. So this will be it from our side. Thank you very much for listening, and apologies for any technical issues we have experienced at the beginning. Latefa will also share with you some materials that you might want to when you're planning your participatory evaluation.
Yes, so we have, well, we just added a few links in the presentation for your use. I mean, there are many more, but we cannot add it all here. So we selected a few that are interesting ones that you can consult or use or for further reading and understanding about the topic that we're discussing. Thank you very much for listening. And now we will go back to, sorry. Yes, so, yes, now we are opening the floor for questions. Thank you. So here we have a first question. Why do participatory evaluation need intensive time and resources? I mean, so we are talking about an evaluation that is aims to involve different stakeholders. So stakeholders can come from the program implementation unit, from the donor, from the community that is involved or that is affected directly by the project. So when you have this in mind, first involving these stakeholders from diverse groups, people have different understanding of what evaluation process is or not really a knowledge at all about what evaluation is. So this really takes time in that sense on bringing everybody on the same page, making sure that everybody has the same understanding of the evaluation, has the same understanding of what is expected of them, has the same understanding of what their contribution in the process is. I mean, that takes some time to implement. And same thing, it's time and resources, financial resources consuming. I don't know, Carla, if you want to add something.
Latefa already touched upon the challenge that it is to engage with more people, and eventually the fact that we will need more time to explain to people that are not used to participating in evaluations why is this an important process, why is it valid that they're engaged, and this might require more meetings, more logistics, and basically because the evaluation will be longer than others. More cumbersome process that needs to be accounted for. So we'll go to the next question. What is the best way to involve vulnerable and illiterate people in a participatory evaluation? This is a very, very good question. And this is why my colleague Latefa before, she pointed out the example of the participatory video, for instance. When they don't need to be vulnerable or illiterate. Just let's think about children, for example. You might want to engage with them in simpler ways. Can be the participatory video, participatory photography, can be games, but you definitely want to speak a language that your stakeholders can speak. So you'll have to adapt. You have to get to know your environment, the environment you're working on very well, and see how can you engage with them in a direct way. I would definitely not advise you to use a survey in this case. actually touching upon the audience that is actually the concern by these methods, because we had to go a step further and understand how could we engage with these communities. Try to also understand what kind of traditions and what would they respond to before deciding on your methodology. Next question.
Next question from Renata Mirula. Do you share results of the evaluation with participants, and if yes, how? Yes, actually the participants are part of the evaluation process. So they are part of defining the plan, they are part of defining the evaluation questions, part of the data collection as well as analysis. So yes, they're naturally part of the result sharing of the evaluation. And usually this could happen through, for example, a workshop that will share the final results of an evaluation. But yeah, the fact that they're already part of the entire process is means that they are aware and they are part of reaching conclusions and defining recommendations, and also on what actions can be undertaken to bring further change. Okay, another question is, do you have examples of how the bank has used participatory evaluation already, particularly in projects? How can participatory approach be integrated into appraisal, midterm reviews, project completions, and other standard bank monitoring and supervision results? Okay.
And the second question now?
Yes.
We go with the first?
Yes. Second, yeah, we take the first one.
Who's asking?
Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew, for your question. So on how can we integrate participatory evaluation, we would say even in the appraisal phase, because, sorry, we are having here internal communication. So I would say that you want to use this method from the beginning. If you want to design an intervention, a project that wants to respond to the needs of a community. We keep on speaking about community, but this, I mean, the client of your intervention, or whoever this is, but I'm thinking about a rural context, and you want to engage with them first through a focus group or a meeting with the community or their representatives, in order to understand their expectations from the intervention from the beginning, and understand how this intervention can bring benefits, but also how can it hurt the community, and take these aspects into consideration in the design of your logical framework when you think about risks and how to mitigate them and what input will be required, and all concerns you must have into consideration: environment level, social level, your objectives. So it's a logic that will spread through other moments of your design and evaluation of your projects, either the MTR or the PCRs. You always want to engage with the community before you reach your conclusions.
So I think within the first question there was how examples of how the bank has used participatory evaluation already. To my knowledge, I don't think we have really used participatory evaluation per se, although we engage with stakeholders.
We engage with the community. The moment you go and interview your beneficiaries, you're doing a participatory evaluation, and you're trying to find your answers with the community, it's participatory evaluation.
But I think it's still limited, you know.
It's very
that
limited,
we have
obviously,
room
but
to do
definitely
more.
we've engaged before, especially at the level of social development interventions. We always do them in partnership with the community.
Next question is, do you think this approach is applicable to both public and private sector operations projects? If so, how can participatory evaluation be undertaken with private sector? If not, why? Okay. I think, yes, definitely it can be applied to the public sector. Private sector, I'm not sure if yes or no, but what I think is that from my knowledge of private sector operations, for example, when we take lines of credit, that usually are composed of sub loans to different businesses. It can be tricky to apply this process to such intervention because there are so many different sub-projects that are financed through it. But it's definitely an interesting question that I think we will further dig into to understand better how we can apply it. I don't know what you think about participatory evaluation with private sector. Okay, next one is how do you handle issues of confidentiality when you wish to highlight successful case stories? I think yes, there is consent. You might want to get consent from where you got the story on whether you can reveal where it comes from. But also, I think it's possible to share a success story without necessarily pointing to a particular person or a particular group of person who shared the story. So I think that's possible to share success stories without really putting the source of the information at risk.
But obviously, the ideal situation is to have agreement from the actors of the story. Otherwise, it's not so advisable. But we have more questions, Latefa?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next one is, how do we account for non-human stakeholders, such as the environment and biodiversity?
Well, in this context, usually you have environmental assessments that account for that. It's one of the criteria that we will have to respect through our evaluation, but doesn't need to be with this method in particular. But it can also come from a claim from the community or complaints by human stakeholders that feel that they are being harmed by the effects of an intervention in environment and biodiversity. So usually there's a human stakeholder voice behind the complaint, but it's also definitely a criteria to take into account in the assessment.
Next question is, how do you collect the data and how do you ensure their quality? We can collect data through different sources. So we have different tools like interviews, focus groups, surveys. For example, we shared earlier with you methods like participatory video, for example. So collecting information from different sources this is how we actually can ensure quality, because we can then triangulate and validate the data that we are collecting. Next question from Gilbert. Do you think that in participatory approach, some group of stakeholders may be important than others in the process, especially looking at their role?
Let me try and answer that one. I'm not sure that at the beginning, when you take the decision of who the stakeholders to be engaged are, it's fair to decide that you'll have ones that will be more important than others. I would advise you to be careful with that decision. Maybe along the way, you want to understand that you might get more information from a few than others, but at the beginning, you want to make sure you are inclusive, that you ensure representation, and that you don't do any discrimination based on your own judgment, because you don't have enough information. So it wouldn't be wise to exclude at the beginning. Maybe after you want to do specific interviews with certain individuals, but try to be as inclusive as you can at the beginning.
Thank you. Are there any more questions, or is there anybody else who wants to
share their
experience with us? Can you hear me?
Is someone trying to? Whoever wants to share their experience, can they just type first, and then we will unmute your mic and allow you to come in? I think there was a second question. Where? That we didn't answer.
Okay,
there's a second question from Matthew that we didn't get to answer. Oh no, sorry, it's not from Matthew, it's a new one.
Okay.
So we have a question from Atikuku Chamba. Is participatory evaluation part of participatory monitoring and evaluation? I would say it's the other way around. Participatory monitoring and evaluation, it's part of the whole process of participatory evaluation, and definitely an important one. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Well, given the silence, I think we will end our webinar. We very much appreciated your participation. Thank you for your patience on our technical challenges. It was a pleasure to share this webinar with you. I hope you leave it inspired and curious, as this was the objective. Thank you, Latefa, for your contribution.
Thank you, everyone, again, for participating with us and for these interesting questions. We hope that we have provided some answers to them, and it's definitely the reflection and interest is definitely continues in the topic. Thank you very much.